The mini spoiler season continues as the Legends of Runeterra team revealed the next champion from Demacia earlier today that'll be in the upcoming expansion to the Call of the Mountain set known as Monuments of Power, which is set to release on October 14th. The new champion is Shyvana, and there have also been some other new cards revealed along with Shyvana, as well as some other cards that were shown this past weekend. In this video we'll be talking about all of it, and I'll be giving some additional thoughts on what types of decks Shyvana has potential in, along with the other cards. Before we jump in, if you like this type of content and want to see more, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future coverage. Let's talk about the cards that were revealed the past few days first before getting to Shyvana. Once again, a quick shout out to Cosmic for putting these graphics together. Be sure to check out his Twitch channel in the top right, and I'll leave a card with a link to his YouTube channel as well in the top right. So first up we have Patched Porobot. This is a 2-mana 2/3 that reads, while in hand, I have a random keyword that changes each round. When I'm summoned, grant me this keyword. So fun fact, the art on this card is already on a card in the game, but it hasn't been on a card you can actually put in your deck. The only time we've seen a Porobot up until this point is during the opening tutorial when you fire up Legends of Runeterra for the very first time and you go up against Heimerdinger. This is a pretty cool card, and I'm pretty happy that Piltover and Zon is getting a 2-mana unit that's both sturdy and can actually kill things early on. I can't stress enough how good the 2/3 stat line has been on 2-mana units in this game. Up until now, PNZ hasn't had any units for 2 mana that are 2/3, and all the playable ones for ranked have had 3/2 stat lines or lower. I like the ability too. Not something super powerful, and a little bit of RNG, but not the worst thing to have either. This is obviously support for anyone wanting to do Poro decks in Piltover and Zon, especially since we got Poro Cannon a few months ago. But I do think that this card is actually worth trying over Chempunk Pickpocket in certain decks, as crazy as that sounds. Pickpocket very rarely gets to hit the Nexus anyway, and Porobot is a more defensive option that the same decks that run Pickpocket would appreciate. Next we have Nopify. This is a 2-mana fast spell that stops a fast or slow spell that costs 3 or less. We had to see this coming. There was no way Deny was going to be the only counterspell that Ionia would ever get. Since this card only hits very specific spells that usually only take up a player's spell mana when played, I think this card is balanced, and obviously good. I think this card will definitely see play, but I don't think this will be a core card in every Ionia deck. Instead, this will be a meta call whenever the metagame is focused around unit-heavy decks that like to use cheaper spells as combat tricks. Next we have Trevor Snoozebottom. This is a 3-mana 0/3 that reads support. Create an attacking Mumble Sprite with my supported allies stats. The Mumble Sprite is a 3-mana 1/1 with elusive and ephemeral. Another support unit that has an amazing ability, but a not so good stat line. The art on this card is amazing. The support ability is amazing and actually gets better the later the game goes in a mid-range deck that would play this. The fact that this is a 0/3, specifically that this has 0 power, will be what keeps this card from seeing play in ranked, since it has no ability to fight for the board, much like Pix. Next we have the University of Piltover. This is a 5-mana landmark that reads round start, discard your hand, create 3 random cards in hand, and grant them fleeting. Somewhat unimpressive. In my opinion, this isn't one of the better landmarks that have been revealed so far, at least in terms of flexibility. While discard aggro sounds like a good candidate, we need to keep in mind that aggro decks usually don't want to play quote-unquote do-nothing cards, which are basically cards that either don't deal damage themselves or don't add damage to the units you already have in play. Plus, you want to be able to maintain some control over what you discard ideally. Augmented Experimenter somewhat flies in the face of that, but Experimenter has multiple abilities that make up for that. And I personally think Experimenter isn't as good as other people think. The only deck where this is remotely playable is Casino decks, and it's even a hard sell there, since I would think you would want even more control over what you discard in that deck than discard aggro does. Honestly, this card is good only in its best scenario, where you have no cards in hand anyway, and you just want this to win you the game instead. It's pretty bad outside of that scenario. Next we have Egghead Researcher. This is a 2-mana 1/3 that reads when I'm summoned, create a random dragon follower in hand. This one seems like it'll only be played for its ability and not its stats. The ability is good. The stats for a 2-drop, not so much. 2 mana 1/3 units are pretty underwhelming when it comes to trying to fight for board control, especially considering this is a Demacia unit. Personally, I don't think the ability is quite good enough to make up for the stats. Sure, you get value back just for playing this, but there are a few dragons in the game that you don't necessarily want to pull from this. Next we have Dragon Guard Lieutenant. This is a 2 mana 3/2 that reads, when I'm summoned, if you behold a dragon, grant me Challenger. Solid card, though a bit awkward with the dragons we have right now in the card pool. Most of the dragons that are mainstays in competitive decks cost 5 mana or more, meaning if you want to play this on round 2 with Challenger already activated, you'll likely need to hold on to or look for one of those more expensive dragons to have in your opening hand, which might punish you if you're going up against aggro decks, which is what this card functions best against. The only dragon you would want to keep in your opening hand in most matchups is Shyvana, who we'll get to later in the video, in which case this gets much better. I still like this card regardless, and I'm glad the Behold mechanic is spreading beyond just having 8+ cost cards or Celestials. Next we have Stony Suppressor. This is a 2 mana 1/3 that reads, all spells cost 1 more. I believe this is the first card we've ever gotten in Runeterra that has an ongoing effect that's debilitating to both players. This won't affect Demacia decks as much since they play fewer spells, and even the spells they do play are typically low mana cost, which is the idea behind this card. The only Demacia decks you wouldn't play this in are decks running Lux or Aurelion Soul. You'd consider this in any unit-heavy Demacia deck though. That said, the 1/3 stat line, again, is underwhelming, so don't expect this card to fight for the board very well, which might actually prevent this card from seeing play in the decks that it's designed to be in, since stats are very important for those Demacia decks. You at least want a 2/3 or a 3/2 for your 2-drops. Something that the now nerfed War Chefs has proven, a card that was a staple in decks like Bannerman and Scouts, but now is nowhere to be found since its power stat was reduced. Next we have Sharp Sight. This is a 2 mana burst spell that reads, give an ally +2/+2, and I can block units with elusive this round. We're finally getting a card that allows non-elusive units to block elusive units in the form of a combat trick. I can't help but think that there will eventually be a keyword that allows this, and that this card will have its text changed to reflect that keyword. The temporary +2/+2 buff also makes this not a dead card if you're in a situation where your opponent has no elusive units, but you want to block and try to kill one of their units anyway. At worst, this will end up being a tech card if we ever go back to an elusives meta, but I could see certain Noxus decks running this card that don't necessarily want to or have the unit synergy to run Transfusion, and they're willing to run Demacia. Next we have Scorched Earth. This is a 3 mana fast spell that reads, kill a damaged unit or destroy a landmark. Another really good modal card since both modes are powerful effects. This might end up actually replacing Noxian Guillotine entirely for some Noxus decks that run it, but not necessarily all of them. Most of the time when you play Guillotine, you only have one target you can hit on average anyway, and it's deceptively tough to get additional value from Guillotine if you want to kill 2 key threats or more. It does happen, but not as often as some might think. I do think Twisted Fate Swain decks should use a little more discretion before replacing Guillotine with this card, especially since standard lists only run 1 Guillotine. The reason why is because the fleeting copy does still have value if you have TF's champion spell, pick a card, in hand, since it gives you fodder for that card, and you typically play it when you're about to level TF up. Scorched Earth doesn't give you that, but this might just be a minor thing that TF Swain is willing to give up for this card. Also, this is more cheap landmark removal, which I'm a fan of. Next we have Stalking Broodmother. This is a 7 mana 6/6 with Fury and Scout. I think this is going to fall in the camp of late game bomb for expedition decks. It's a 7-drop that doesn't do enough for ranked play, I'm afraid. Similar to Uzgar the Ancient for Freljord when Trundle and the other trolls were first revealed for Call of the Mountain. That's not a bad thing though. Broodmother is beefy and will end games in that format, when there aren't a lot of consistent answers for a 7-mana 6/6 with Fury and Scout that will potentially get an increase in stats twice every other round, especially if you can give this challenger or grant an enemy unit vulnerable. Next we have Noxcria Arena. This is a 5-mana landmark that reads Round End. Your strongest ally and the weakest enemy strike each other. This might be my favorite landmark card they've shown so far. Not because it's in Noxus or that it's potentially very powerful, but because it's so flavorful. Howling Abyss is flavorful too, but I already said my piece on that card and my thoughts on it haven't changed much. We do need to keep in mind that there are scenarios where your strongest unit will still die to their weakest unit if you have this card out, and that's because some of the popular Noxus units in Ranked have low health. So you won't be able to just stick this in any Noxus deck. This card should be good when paired with other regions that have units with high stats like Freljord or Demacia. Frostbite decks are what's most compelling to me since they have access to 1-mana 5/5 Yetis. Although if you're running Treferian Gloryseeker, she might die more often than you'd like, and is the perfect example of what I said earlier about high power, low health units in Noxus. And finally, let's move on to the champion that everyone watching this video has been waiting for, Shyvana. So Shyvana is a 4-mana 3/4 that reads Attack, give me +1/+1 this round. Her level up requirement is I've seen dragon allies deal 12+ damage. When Shyvana levels up, she is a 4/5 with Fury and reads Attack, give me +2/+2 this round and create a fleeting Strafing Strike in hand. Strafing Strike is a 3-mana fast spell that reads an ally and an enemy strike each other. Then if the ally is a dragon, heal it too. So let's touch on Shyvana first. Not quite as good as I was hoping, but still a decent champion. Shyvana is also the cheapest dragon we have in the game as of right now, unless we're getting one even cheaper that hasn't been revealed yet. She kind of has a pseudo Fury ability at level 1 when she's attacking, and if you're curving out in the mid to late game and you're running the right spells that support your dragons, leveling up Shyvana shouldn't be too hard. These are going to be spells that either give your dragons challenger, give enemy units vulnerable, or just generally allow your dragons to strike other units. All that being said, her level up condition basically means that she won't be played outside of dedicated dragon decks, since her level 1 doesn't offer enough to other decks. Targon is obviously going to be the best pairing for Shyvana, since that's where all the other dragons are. We're basically getting more cards that form another deck from this set that's practically pre-built for players, and those cards don't really work outside of that pre-built deck. Nightfall decks and deep decks were also prime examples of pre-built decks. You do need those type of cards in card games, but I'm personally not a fan of it. I think having to discover decks and synergies is more fun. But anyway, her level 2 is kind of where it's at. Shyvana gets stacks of Fury bonuses basically, in addition to already gaining Fury itself when she levels. The fleeting Strafing Strike is nice too, especially if you can protect Shyvana with other effects so she can snowball that Fury ability. And protecting units is something Demacia is quite good at doing. Speaking of Strafing Strike, let's talk about it before looking at Confront. I don't think this is quite strong enough to be main decked even in dragon decks. It competes with single combat, which is not only cheaper, but is better during the early game as well for dragon decks, in case you need to take out an early unit to prevent a board swing. Demacia on its own has very few comeback mechanics, meaning if they fall too far behind on the board, they're usually not going to get the board back. So Demacia has to maintain board control at all times, especially if the other region you're pairing it with doesn't have any comeback mechanics either. Strafing Strike doesn't get full value until after you start playing dragons, and even after that, it's slightly more expensive than single combat is. So even though Strafing Strike is advertising itself as the single combat for dragon decks, I don't think it's good enough to be played over single combat. I think you're better off just getting the fleeting copies from level 2 Shyvana as additional resources to use. Alright, now let's talk about Confront. So Confront is a 3-mana burst spell that reads Grant an Ally Challenger. In the case of Shyvana's champion spell, you shuffle Shyvana into your deck. So I'm always glad to see more cards that give units access to challengers, since we had so few of them in the base foundation set. And all those were in Demacia and were a little underwhelming to use in ranked. Granted, this is too. I'm also really glad this is a burst spell. If it wasn't, I'd have a very hard time justifying this card over Laurent Duelist, since you get a 4/2 body with Duelist while giving something else challenger. I think Dragon decks and maybe a few other board-based decks will play this in some capacity, but I don't think this is a staple card either. This will probably be a one-of in some decks, similar to Sonic Wave and Lee Sin decks. Other Shyvana players will be fine not running any and just having this as a champion spell. Next we have Eclipse Dragon. This is a 7 mana 7/5 with Fury and reads Daybreak. The next dragon or celestial unit you play costs 2 less. And Nightfall, create a random dragon follower and celestial follower in hand. I love this card. I've actually been waiting for Riot to make a card that had both Daybreak and Nightfall on it, but I didn't think it would show up this soon. I also love that this costs 7 and has such a good effect no matter when you play it, since there aren't a lot of 7 mana units in Legends of Runeterra that are actually good. I think most dragon decks are going to run this. Every Shyvana deck I think will for sure. Most Aurelion Soul decks, whether they're paired with Shyvana or not, will likely play this too. The only one that I'm not quite as sure on is Asol Ramp, especially given that they might try to play the Howling Abyss now, but I think if they can find a way to make it work and fit this in too, then they will. If this was a 6/6, it'd be even better in my opinion, but this is still a solid card. Next we have Kadragrin the Infernal. This is a 9 mana 9/6 with Fury and reads, when I'm summoned, grant other dragon allies everywhere +2/+2. I think this card almost gets there as far as playability, meaning that if this is played, it'll see fringe play. Similar to Shyvana, if you're curving out with dragons in the mid to late game and they survive until you drop this card, it's absolutely insane. If you don't have a board though, this is quite a bit worse because you have to wait to get full value out of it, since you then need to draw more cards, find your other dragons, then have the mana and time to play them. If this does see play in dragon decks, it'll likely be as a one-of, similar to Bright Steel Formation in Shen decks and some Bannerman decks. And finally we have Dragon Guard Lookout. This is a 6 mana 3/5 that reads, when I'm summoned, if you behold a dragon, rally. I can't help but think the stats are a little bit tame for a unit that grants rally. It gets me thinking that Riot is being more and more careful when they design units like this, since Lookout has even lower stats than Citrus Courier from Bilgewater, who largely does the same thing, although Courier is tied to activating Plunder, which can be harder to do than simply finding a dragon. I am keeping in mind that Rally is just that powerful, especially if it's slapped on a unit that grants it, so maybe it's good that this is only a 3/5. I think people will definitely experiment with this in Shyvana decks. Whether it sticks around or not will remain to be seen, especially since we have a 6 mana dragon already called Inviolus Vox that's actually pretty strong, but hasn't seen play mainly due to not having enough good dragons to play. And that's everything that's been revealed from the past few days. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to leave a like, as it really helps me out and gets this video out there to others in the community. If you don't want to miss future coverage of the new set from me, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the notification bell below to make sure you know when the next video goes live. Feel free to check out the other Legends of Runeterra videos that I have on the channel, or even the other places you can find me on the internet. You'll find links to my Twitter, Twitch channel, and our community Discord that you can join as well in the video description below. Thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.